Today's lesson is about high and low pressure systems. You'll notice in the diagram that there's a body of air that is falling. It starts out way high in the atmosphere and then it falls. Why that happens is because this is cold air and cold air sinks. And when you look at the H symbol, you'll notice that it's blue. And what that symbolizes is that that stands for cold air. The other thing you'll notice is this little arrow, and that it shows you that as the air molecules fall to the ground, when they do hit the ground, that they spread out, but they spread out clockwise. So if you'll notice again, going to the little animation, all of those particles are moving clockwise, like this. Now, the other thing that you'll notice about the picture is that as those particles move down toward the ground, that it's sun shining. And the reason that you'll notice the sunlight and you don't really see any clouds is because when cold air sinks, there's nothing left up in the atmosphere. So that means no clouds. And if there's no clouds, then that means really good weather. And so we see the sunshine. Now, a trick to help you to remember that is to remember for high pressure that equals happy weather, such as sunshine, no clouds. H for high, H for happy. Now, the next type of pressure system is the low pressure system. Now, this is the exact opposite. What you'll notice is that this is a body of air that starts low, that is warmed by the Earth's surface, and since it's warm, it's going to rise. Well, once it rises, what happens is that that water vapor gets up into the air and it gets cold all of a sudden, and then it forms clouds. So what we say is that that air, since it's rising, it has to be warm because warm air rises. Now, a trick to remember that is to look at the word low, such as low pressure. The L stands for lifts. So that means that it's a body of air that goes up. It lifts straight up. And why does it lift straight up? Well, because of the W, because warm air is going to lift. Warm air rises. Now, the L in this case is going to be designated red, where the high was designated blue. Low is red because it stands for hot air or warm air that is rising. Now, this is a little different in terms of how these spin. As they lift from the ground, the air particles actually move in a counterclockwise motion like this. And we'll go back to the animation, and you can see that all of those particles, as they lift from the ground, they move counterclockwise. And what I like to use as a trick to remember that low pressure equals bad weather is just to remember that going backwards on a clock is not good. Something's wrong if your clock is moving backwards. So I remember that low pressure always brings bad weather. So low, low, sad, bad is a trick to remember. And then for going back over to the high pressure, happy, happy, or high, high, happy, happy. So high pressure always brings really good weather. Low pressure is going to bring bad weather. Now let's kind of study that once more. That when that low pressure air rises, again, now you've got lots of things in the atmosphere to cool down, lots of air molecules that are going to condense and form clouds, and which ultimately means that it's going to produce bad weather, such as it could be drizzle, it could be rain, or it could be really bad. If a cumulonimbus cloud forms, it could mean that we could have tornadoes or hurricanes or hail, thunderstorms, and things like that. Now, why do we call it low? If you'll notice, down here at the surface level, for our purposes, there's not a lot of air. So that means that there's not a lot of pressure. There's no air coming in contact with us. And so as a result, we call it low. In the sky, where and we won't say all, but most of the air has risen. Now that's a lot of air molecules running around and hitting each other. So that produces a lot of pressure. So in the sky, it's going to be high. But down here at the surface level where we live, we call it low pressure. And we always name the pressure is based off of what we experience. So in this case, at Earth's surface, we call it low. There's not a lot of air there. And going back to this picture here, this is called high pressure because now all of the air is around us. And not all, but most of that air comparatively with the sky, all of this air is with us, and that's a lot of air colliding with our bodies, so we call it high pressure. In the sky, since there's not very much air up there, that would be low. And again, we name pressures based off of what we are experiencing here on the ground level. All right, now let's talk a little bit more about these pressures. We had mentioned that with low pressure that it spins counterclockwise, and we mentioned with high pressure that it spins clockwise. So I want to show you a couple of diagrams to illustrate that point. Now, you'll notice that in this top diagram, the red, remember that the red is indicating warm air, and remember warm air rises. And you'll notice that as it's drawing in the air, that it's going in a counterclockwise movement. And that's probably better illustrated in this picture here. You can see those arrows are spinning and they're going in a counterclockwise motion. And remember, counterclockwise, spinning against the clock or going backwards is not good. It always brings bad weather. And here's another little diagram. Again, you can see these arrows are kind of curving counterclockwise. Now, let's look at the high pressure. You'll notice for the high pressure, again, those arrows are indicated as blue because high pressure air is cold air, and cold air goes down or it sinks. And as it does, that hits the surface of the earth, it spreads out in a clockwise fashion. You can see these arrows move in a clockwise fashion very nicely here. You can also see it in this diagram, that all of the arrows spin clockwise, and in this one, they're spinning clockwise, which is normal, and that's good. We like having high pressure. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is what kind of air, where it moves toward. And I want you to look right here at this blue/red arrow, and you'll notice that the high pressure, when it comes down, it always kind of feeds into a low pressure system. So high pressure air always moves toward low pressure, and it kind of sucks it up like a little vacuum. You'll also notice in this picture as well, particularly if you are looking at these two arrows right here, you can kind of see that this arrow right here feeds into the low pressure system. So whenever you have a low pressure and a high pressure side by side, the low pressure always moves, that air always moves toward the low pressure. And this is sort of like the vacuum. This is sort of like a snow blower. It's kind of pushing down, blowing down the air, and it hits the ground and it spreads out, and the low pressure is like a vacuum. So this kind of spits it out, this kind of sucks it up like a vacuum, and it creates a system. All right, now let's talk about how to read pressures on a barometer. What you're seeing right now is a barometer, and this measures air pressure. Now you'll notice that there's a couple of different hands here. There's this gold looking one, and there's the black hand. Now the gold, or maybe bronze, this actually is a little dial right here that you can turn. And what you do is you set it on the pressure that it is like currently, like right now. And you'll see that it's kind of still. You have to kind of wind it and it stays in place. It's called the setting hand. Now, the black hand, the longer, is a slightly bit longer, I think. This is called the measuring hand. And this you have no control over. It's based off of what happens with the pressure. Now, if you'll look at the actual dial, you'll see some words. You'll see stormy, you'll see rain, change, fair, very dry. Now, you'll also notice some numbers. On the inner dial, you've got some rather large numbers, and that actually stands for the numbers that indicate millibars. That's the units, actually. So larger numbers go with the millibars. On the outer ring, where you see, for example, the 28, the 29, 30, and 31, what that is a secondary measurement system, and what it does is it measures the pressure in inches of mercury. Now, these days, the barometers don't really have mercury in them, but what they do have is kind of like a spring that is sensitive to the differences in the pressure. Now, let me show you how to actually read one of these. This is a diagram of a barometer. And you'll notice that we're kind of helping you out. We're just going to look at one scale at a time. In this case, we're reading millibars of pressure. Now, the way the dial works, this is the shorter hand. So, for example, this is the let's see. I forgot the name of the hand over here, but the setting hand, I guess. And it's pointed to 1040, and that would be millibars. That means that's what the pressure was. Now, this hand is the measuring hand, and this you have no control over. It's just subject to whatever the pressure is. And right now, it is pointed to, well, if this green line right here is 950, the next one's 951, it's set to 952. So that's 952, make sure I'm right, yay, 952 millibars. And I want to make sure I said my words right. The measuring hand is the, this is the one we have no control over. The setting hand is the one that we can place to where the pressure was. All right, and to look at the setting hand, it was at 1040 millibars. All right, let's look at another example. This time we're going to be looking in inches of mercury. Oddly enough, the Hg stands for mercury. It's the symbol actually stands for the Latin word of mercury, but you don't have to worry about that. Just look at the inches. In means inches. And if we look at the setting hand, this little blue one, you'll notice that right here we don't have any numbers, but we do see a 31. So what we're going to do is count in tenths. So this is 31, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. So that's 31.4. Now looking at the measuring hand, this is set at 29, so this must be 29.1. And if you'll look at our information, that was right. So setting hand again is going to be at 31.4, so that's 31.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. Measuring hand is 29.1. Now, you have a worksheet in your packet that's going to help us to kind of look over and review all of the concepts that we should know about air pressure. So after I'm done and all the information is on the screen, you might want to pause and fill in your worksheet. Starting with the temperatures that we would expect with differences in air pressure. With the high pressure, we're going to call it a high pressure if it's cold air and it's sinking. We're going to call it low pressure if it's warm air and it's rising. What types of weather patterns do we notice with the different pressures? Well, if we are having a low pressure, then that equals SAD because it forms clouds, and clouds mean rain, drizzle, or storms. It's going to be low pressure at the surface where we are because there's not a lot of air molecules there, and high pressure in the sky because that's where all the air molecules are, and they're condensing in the upper elevations because they're cold. So it's high in the sky. That's where lots of water vapor is, and that's going to make your clouds. And clouds mean bad weather. And then for high pressure, happy, happy, high, high, okay, or high, high, happy, happy. This is where at the surface level it's going to be high pressure, but in the sky it's going to be low pressure because there's not a whole lot of air molecules. So if there's not a lot of air molecules, that's great for us because then that means that there's nothing to make clouds with. So we get to have sunshine, okay? And then for air masses, polar air masses form high pressures, tropical air masses form low pressures, and then finally a look at our barometer. Now with the barometers, 1,000 is at the top. If the dial is moving toward the left, that means that the air pressure is falling. If the pressure is moving toward the right, it means that the air pressure is rising and the weather is getting better. So that's a quick rundown on the stuff you should know about air pressure. Hope you learned a lot. You might want to pause your screen so that you can write this information down on your worksheet.